Hi, folks. I'm Denise Howell, and you're joining us for Uneven Distribution here at the Hearsay Culture Network. I'm very excited that you've joined us for this episode. If you're a new listener, here at Uneven Distribution, we seek to share the insights from the time travelers among us, those who can discern the plot lines of our future from right here in the present. We hope to help you better understand and anticipate events you might not yet see coming down the pipe. And we have a fabulous guest for those purposes today with us here, Dan Sally of the You Don't Have to Yell podcast. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Denise. I'm going to add time traveler to my LinkedIn profile after this recording.
Please do. You're more than welcome. You are indeed one of the time travelers, I hope. I mean, personally, because your show is dedicated to, well, I'll just go ahead and give people the tagline for your show. Yeah. It's called You Don't Have to Yell. And when you look it up and start scrolling through episodes, you'll see that Dan points out 38% of Americans feel the two-party system works great. But his podcast, You Don't Have to Yell, is for the other 62%. So I tend to find myself in that other 62%, which is probably why I gravitated toward your show when it launched 3 years ago. Happy anniversary, by the way. You launched in August of 2019. And during those 3 years, you've covered the real hot button issues. You've covered immigration, the two-party system, U.S. debt, defense spending, gun violence and gun control, election processes, education, race, gerrymandering, abortion, climate, and what Santa Claus has to do with income tax. So if you're interested in any of those topics, you should definitely check out Dan's podcast because he's got a great catalog of shows delving into those issues. And when he's not podcasting, he's on the Digital Strategy Council for Rank the Vote, which is a group that advocates for ranked choice voting. And if you haven't heard of that, that's a system that would allow voters to rank candidates in order of preference instead of just picking one. So you imagine yourself in the ballot box and you'd pick candidate 1, 2, and 3 as your choices. And then some math would go on behind the scenes to try and figure out, who rises to the top there. How did you get involved with Rank the Vote, Dan?
It was a long and winding road, Denise. It actually, oddly enough, started through the podcast because when I started You Don't Have to Yell, I had identified the way we elect candidates to office as the chief reason for the level of polarization we have in this country. So for those listening who might not be familiar with our electoral system in its intricacies, we have a system called first past the post. Effectively, what that means is the person who wins one more vote than second place is automatically the winner. Now, of course, that sounds logical, but when you think that could mean, for example, that you win 28% of the vote in a 5-way race, it starts to not look like democracy. And if you look globally, if you look at the countries that have the highest rate of electoral satisfaction and electoral transparency, they all have systems of proportional representation that are loosely based or have some aspect of ranked choice voting in it. And so I went through the so as I mentioned before, I was doing the podcast for about a year, and I really thought I was one of the few people who knew about this or had figured it out. And I was sort of just shouting into the dark. And then I actually came across Rank the Vote while I was looking for guests. And so I approached the director. We chatted a little bit about doing an interview. One thing leads to another. And now all of a sudden I'm rounding up people to help with their digital marketing over there. And it's been great because it's been a way for me to link up with like-minded folks, but I also feel like this is a movement that is really starting to gain momentum in this country for something you said earlier, which is the majority of us don't really feel well represented by the current system. And what ranked choice voting can do is it can really open up more choice and a broader set of opinions in elections.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of that concept before, so I'm really excited to learn about it. And maybe you are truly a time traveler, and that is something that we can anticipate coming down the pipe. That's why we have Dan on the show today. We're going to talk about something we certainly know is coming down the pipe, and that is the 2024 election. And we're going to try and discern something about how that election might work in the United States with Dan here today. He's the perfect person, by the way, to help rank the vote with digital marketing because he worked in digital marketing for HubSpot. And he also spent 8 years as a professional stand-up comedian and made it to the finals of the Boston Comedy Festival. So if you feel the need to leave us in stitches a little bit today as we talk about these very serious topics, please feel free. We could use a little levity.
I'll try my best. I'm desperately unfunny when it comes to electoral politics, but
I'll
see if I can throw a few. I'll see if I can throw a few zingers in there for you.
That's too bad. Yeah, I mean, it can be very funny at times. It definitely tickles me from time to time, but it also more frequently brings me to tears. So
yeah, I know. I wish I could have written a joke as funny as some of the things that have happened over the last 4 to 6 years in American politics. So there's that.
Absolutely. Well, getting back to the tagline of your show about the 62% of Americans who don't so much prefer our two-party system and feel a bit at sea. I don't know about you, but when I turn on the news these days, all I see covered, and I'm talking about television news, and I suppose this is true of print news as well and online news, what I see covered most extensively are what's happening at the extremes of our two-party system. And the middle is sort of left hanging out to dry. So I did want to talk to you about the role of the middle in our upcoming election, and specifically whether there are some issues. We pay attention to a lot of tech issues here at the show. And it strikes me as that might be a ripe area where there are middle ground issues where people can come together. Because regardless of one's party affiliation, you might not so much like what's going on with things like data use and security, whether at the government level or the private enterprise level. You might not like all the ad tech out there that feels creepy and functions without your explicit consent, or you don't remember consenting to these things, or it didn't really jump out at you that you did. You might not like the scope of both private and public surveillance. And you might be a little bit concerned about all of the wearables and Internet of Things devices that are gathering data about us, both in our homes and in our workplaces and for our kids in their schools. There's also a bunch of antitrust litigation going on right now against big tech companies. And I'm just wondering if you agree with me, Dan, and if you identify any other kind of areas that might have the potential to bring people together, because these don't really seem like partisan issues.
Yeah, so I'd say on the tech front, definitely. And I think the reason for that is that everybody hates tech right now. Everybody has a reason to hate big tech. Conservatives hate big tech because of cries of tech censorship. The left hates big tech because they're monopolies and there's a lot of very wealthy people behind it. And the middle just wants to be able to have a conversation and not have whatever they were talking about appear in their Instagram feed 10 seconds later. And so everybody's coming together on this, which I think is great. So I definitely think there's a lot of room for regulation. I think I should say there's a lot of room for issues of data privacy to be addressed. I think that at least what I see, and you know, obviously, Denise, this is your world too. What I see in the tech sector are kind of two things going on, which is first off, tech behavior being dictated by laws overseas. So for example, a lot of US-based marketers are adhering to GDPR, which is the EU's digital privacy law. And they're doing that because they can't be certain whether they have data on an EU citizen in their servers or not, just because of the nature of the internet. And again, for those of you who are listening who may not be familiar with GDPR, effectively what it says is that an individual, number one, has to opt in order to be tracked, and number two, has the right to be forgotten, the right to come in and be scrubbed from every server you have, every place where you have their data. And that can be a very challenging thing. And so I think there's that, number one. I think number two, what you're starting to see is a lot of digital privacy regulations pop up at the state level. And that's generally when the federal government tends to come in. I think businesses on the whole prefer an overarching federal policy as opposed to a patchwork of state regulations, especially when you're a business that operates without borders like web-based businesses do. And so I think there's a lot of room for that. I think that's probably the one issue where we might be able to make some progress and might be able to come together. As to whether that solves the greater problem of everything as to whether this solves the greater problem about both sides seemingly fighting about everything else, I don't know. But certainly that's an area where we can make some movement, I think.
Do you have a lot of confidence that if lawmakers decide, okay, this is an area where we can get some things accomplished, because these things do seem to sort of cut across party lines and feel nonpartisan? I go back to the hearings that took place, I want to say they were in 2020 or 2021, where the various tech titans were hauled before Congress, and Congress did a very good job of exposing how little the particular lawmakers actually knew about how these services worked and how they function for people day to day in society. And so I have my concerns about Congress's ability to regulate effectively and properly in this area. Do you share those concerns?
100%. That's a very valid concern. I think there are a couple of schools of thought on that. I think first and foremost is that generally businesses with a lot of money end up figuring out a way to write their own laws and write the rules for themselves. And a big fear amongst libertarian circles on tech regulation is the fact that the most established tech platforms, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Twitter, so on, will be able to hire lobbyists who will be able to write the laws in their favor and really provide a regulatory moat that makes it very difficult for upstart competitors to come in. Because one of the beautiful things right now about the tech space is it still is one where somebody can come in and disrupt a very well-established company right out of their apartment or their house. I think, but to your other point, which is the savviness of Congress or lack thereof. I mean, first off, most of them are lawyers. I have a couple lawyers in the family. They're smart about a lot of things. You're a lawyer, actually, so I shouldn't even. You're like the one lawyer I know of who's actually tech savvy. Every other lawyer I know, like, can barely turn on their phone. And so I think so I think there's definitely an issue there where the people writing the laws may not be as familiar with the platforms. And so they're always going to be behind because, and you see this with a lot of other things too. You see this with regulations on chemicals, for example, where the chemical industry can develop chemicals faster than the regulators can keep up with. And so they're always one step ahead. And so I do see that happening. And that is a concern of mine as well, definitely.
Yeah. There are a few lawmakers currently who actually do know something about tech and the way it functions and the way it should be regulated. Ron Wyden comes to mind.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, do you think that this, as we go toward the next election cycle, do you think any candidate might think it's strategically valuable to distinguish themselves on their knowledge and ability to be able to regulate tech in a effective way?
I think that'd be a tough one. Mm-hmm. I do. And this gets back to one of the root problems behind our electoral system right now, which is, elections should be about things like that, right? Mm-hmm. Elections should be about things that really matter to all of us and affect all of us. So for example, digital privacy, that's a big one. Inflation, that's another one we're all concerned with, right? But that doesn't differentiate you enough from your competitor in the United States. And so we've had this history now going back almost 50 years of basing a lot of our elections on wedge issues, primarily on identity issues. So, you can name the big ones. There's guns, there's abortion. Now there's race and ethnicity, I think, has come into play, immigration. And these are there's a great study actually I read that summarized it perfectly, which said that more people identify as a specific religion or a specific ethnicity than they do with a certain income bracket, for example. And so it's a lot easier to really get down to very personal issues with people when you campaign in this way. And getting back to our electoral system, I think our electoral system makes it very easy to win elections based on that. Because in theory, if democracy functioned as it should, then we would be electing people that reflect the majority view of the voters they serve. And so they would be running on these issues. They would be running on issues of wide appeal. And voters would vote based on their confidence that this person will be able to carry it out. What happens now is those issues get sidelined in favor of issues that the candidates know will drive hardened partisans out to the polls, because those people guarantee votes. You are guaranteed a certain set of votes if you think a certain way, for example, on gun control. And those people are going to show up and they are going to vote for you. And then after that, once you've cobbled together a winnable faction of hardened partisans, all you need to do is not turn off the middle enough to get them to show up for you. Or the alternative is to make the other person look so unappealing that the middle doesn't turn out and vote for them. And that's how we found ourselves in the situation we're in now.
Yeah, you've gotten right to why I cry about our political situation. Okay, well, maybe I'll nurture some hope that someone might put issues out there and run on a platform that brings people together rather than drives them apart. But I'm also not naive along those lines. Yeah. A candidate that sounds like she might have the ability to do that, although I really scratch my head when I think about her and her role in the upcoming election, is Liz Cheney. My right-wing friends, and I have several of them, think she's a complete non-factor. They, in fact, one of them described their distaste for her on the far right as even more acute than the left's for Trump. So if she's expecting to get support from the Republican Party, I think that's probably not happening based on, just the anecdotal things that I'm being told. My left-wing friends, on the other hand, think she's kind of intriguing. They're not inclined to vote for a Republican, but that's where she finds herself. So I'm really interested in whether you think she'll play a role in the circus that must unfold before us in 2024 and what that might look like.
Yeah, I'm intrigued too. I think she is part of a wing of Republicans who really want to move away from Trump and really want to move away from the MAGA movement. They feel it's centered too much around one person. They are troubled by advocating violence or of course by what happened on January 6th and the flouting of the rule of law, and they really just want to move on. And I think she's part of that coalition. I think she'll have a tough time in a general election because she's really conservative at her core. So she's a conservative, like she's very, she votes in line with Trump despite disagreeing with him as a person. So I think she's going to have a very difficult time even getting the middle. But I do think she's a symptom of that greater problem. And if you go through the Republicans who voted to impeach Trump and survived their most recent primary, they all live in states that have an alternative to the first past the post electoral system. So we have Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. They use a form of ranked choice voting called Final Four, where there's an open primary, the top four candidates who win go on to the general, and then the number one by ranked choice voting wins office. Washington and California both have jungle primaries, and they have 2 representatives, 2 out of the 10 in the House of Republicans who voted to impeach Trump. They survived as well. And so I think what it goes to show is that when you have a system where the people who run for office are determined solely by the party primary, which is usually a very small subset of the most partisan voters, you're going to have a very difficult time getting candidates who really are going to speak their mind and are really going to govern locally and with local interests in mind, as was intended. And I think in the case of Cheney, I think she arguably represented Wyoming very well. And at the same time, her voting her conscience and her bucking the party in the process ultimately resulted in the most partisan voters in Wyoming voting her out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned you posted something on Twitter recently that talked about primaries and how few people turn out from them. There was a Florida primary recently where all 28 districts were decided in the primary on the vote of only 9.5% eligible voters. In New York, 20 out of 26 districts decided in the primary with only a 2.9% turnout. How do we fix that problem?
It's a huge problem. There's a great study called The Primary Problem by an organization called Unite America. And they took a look at, I think it was the 2018 midterm elections. And what they found out is 10% of the population was responsible for electing over 80% of members of Congress. And again, it's due to the way our primary system is set up. And maybe just to add some detail for the listener, as you probably already know, before a candidate gets into the general election and runs as either the Republican or the Democratic candidate, there's a primary process. And in that process, they're running against one or more contenders for their party's nomination into the general election. And those primaries are in most states, or in many states, are solely partisan. So it means you have only Republicans voting in the Republican primary, only Democrats voting in the Democratic primary. And the debate generally in those primaries isn't necessarily who can best capture the middle, but more who best captures the essence of the party. And generally the trend has been to tack harder and harder and harder to the extremes. And so very often what you'll have primaries that have 4 or 5 people, and the winner wins by a significant minority of votes. So a great example is Massachusetts District 4, 2018, the representative who now serves in Congress for that district won the Democratic primary by 28% of the vote. So 28% of a portion of the electorate was responsible for sending somebody to Congress. And that's just, and mind you, this representative has pristine credentials, is a veteran, went to Harvard. I mean, is the type of person you want in Congress. And so I have no problem with the person himself, but the method that got him there is problematic. And you see that across the country. So
what if Cheney decides to run as a Democrat? Do you see that remotely as a possibility?
Never. Oh, never.
No.
Oh, no, because she would absolutely get crushed in the primaries. Mm-hmm. She would absolutely get crushed. Because if you look at the last primary, right? I mean, Joe Biden was almost too right-wing, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying he's left-wing. I mean, I consider him probably a fairly moderate Democrat, but I mean, Liz Cheney, I don't even know if they let Liz Cheney in the building. She is.
Yeah. So if the right doesn't like her and she's doesn't have a chance as a Democrat, is there any reason to think that she could somehow Ross Perot her way into a legitimate run?
Maybe. I mean, maybe. I think there are a lot of people in this country who are generally, how do I put this? I think there are a lot of people in this country who would really gravitate towards a platform of fiscal conservatism and throw the social aspect out. So mm-hmm. They don't want to fight about critical race theory. They are fine with gay couples getting married. They're moderate to pro Roe v. Wade, but they also don't necessarily think that the Treasury is just a bottomless pit of money that we can use to solve solve the country's problems. And I think that could be really appealing. That was really, Ross Perot in a lot of ways was like a proto-Trump. if you look, I mean, Trump didn't run on fiscal conservatism so much, but he certainly ran on the fears and the problems with globalization, and that was really Perot's platform at the time. Albeit Perot was far more moderate and had a much different tone about it. So I think for Liz Cheney it would be very difficult. But what could happen, and what I'm watching for right now is, I think if enough Republicans are threatened by the MAGA movement, and if enough Republicans have a problem being able to advance their own careers because of the MAGA movement, I think that's when you could see a coalition in the party rise up to put an end to it. And in a lot of cases, I think that every time something happens to Trump, I think every Republican with presidential ambitions is silently cheering, because if Trump gets indicted, or if Trump has some significant legal troubles that knock him out of the running, that clears the field for them.
Right.
And I think I'll tell you two things I'm watching right now.
He's really literally the elephant in the room at the moment.
Yes. Amongst the elephants. Exactly. Yes. That's exactly it. Yeah. And the two things I'm watching, one is this feud between Trump and McConnell. That's very interesting, because Mitch McConnell knows Washington. He knows how to wield power, and he's very, very patient and very calculating. And I feel like if Trump becomes enough of a threat to his standing, which arguably he might already be, I could see Mitch McConnell working behind the scenes to gradually undermine Trump, undermine his candidacy, and get him out. The second trend that's a little more troubling to me is, Lindsey Graham was in the press this week for saying that if Trump was indicted, there'd be blood in the streets. And that is very, very dangerous, I think. And I don't think Lindsey Graham said that without an understanding of what it meant. And what scares me is there's a lot of research that shows that democracy depends more on the commitments of elites to democracy than it does on the voters. And when I hear Lindsey Graham say something like that, what that tells me is that he sees a greater political future in abandoning democratic norms than he does in bolstering them.
Gosh.
And that now it's just him right now. And I think he is sensing that he's in a bit of trouble, because of course he's part of that whole investigation going on in Georgia, and maybe he's just feeling the walls closing in and he's acting desperate. But I think if you get more people acting like that, then you've got a real problem. Then you've got a party that effectively sees their route to power as undermining democracy. And I'm not, and for the conservative listener, I'm not saying that's happening now. I'm just saying that type of language is really, really dangerous.
And I wonder, I don't know if Lindsey Graham has come out and tried to clarify or qualify what he said and say, I'm just sort of calling it like I see it might happen, rather than urging anybody toward those activities or some other spin on what he said. I think he could probably spin it such that he's not the poster child for the right abandoning democracy. But I just don't know if he's tried to come out and clarify, or is just trying to put kind of a controversial remark behind him at this point. But it does seem like you were getting at a moment ago, there are candidates that would, if they had the chance to get out of Trump's shadow, they would do so. And there's a voting bloc in the United States who probably would be interested in them. And I just wonder, you're back to your tagline for your show, the 62% of Americans who don't feel the two-party system is working for them. What's their status right now? What is the middle/moderate voting bloc in the US look like? What is even an independent voter these days?
It's a great question. And the odd thing is the majority of independents are functionally, from an electoral standpoint, Democrats or Republicans. So typically they vote Democratic or Republican, although their turnout is lower. So what you almost see is this U shape where the closer you are to the center, the less likely you are to turn out to vote. And I think a lot of that is probably because, number one, you're not going to be voting in primaries. Number two, if you're living in a one-party district, you're probably not going to be, or a gerrymandered district, you're probably not going to be voting in midterms. And so really you're going to show up to vote for the presidential election every 4 years, and that's it. I do think that there's more areas where we agree than where we disagree on, especially on these wedge issues. And I think that we're shut out of the conversation because, and I say we because I consider myself part of that 60+%. I think we're shut out of the conversation because it's not easy to hook us on one single issue.
Right. And increasingly, we're not only shut out of the conversation, but we're belittled and pushed aside with monikers like Rhino on the right. And I just heard this one recently, Dino on the left, both meaning Republican in name only or Democrat in name only. And I think it's funny. My college nickname was always Dino instead of Denise. So my friends are now officially calling me a Dino. All right. In every sense of the term. Yeah. And I mean, while there's some humor to that, there's also, it's not humorously intended in many instances. It's scurrilously intended. Like, you're not with us, so you must be against us. And I wonder what sort of impact that is going to have on people's voting proclivities.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it turns a lot of people off. I really do. I think that I think to a certain extent, a lot of it's kind of performance art in a way too, because if you look, like, every year, right, the villains of the Senate are always the moderates, right? In the Trump years, it was Murkowski and Collins, and to an extent Mitt Romney, and now it's Sinema and Manchin on the Democratic side, and I think that people ignore what a vital role they play in ensuring that their party can say whatever they want and not have to deliver on those promises. And so I think you can't have an AOC or an Elizabeth Warren without a Joe Manchin to stop them. And vice versa. You can't have a Josh Hawley or a Ted Cruz or a Jim Jordan without a Lisa Murkowski to stop them. And so I think that it helps from a partisan perspective, because, again, right now in this highly gerrymandered country, in this country where most congressional elections are non-competitive, they really need to appeal to that base, and they can't afford to turn off that base. And so they need those pot stirrers. They need the bomb tossers. Like, that is essential to get people out to vote. And that's what convinces everybody that their lives are at stake in a given election, which is partially true, just not for the reasons they're being told it is. And so I do think that sometimes it helps if people look at the theater behind it and understand that really what they're doing is they're trying to whip up the base with the understanding these promises are never going to be fulfilled.
Well, my next question is whether you think there's anything that can motivate these sort of middle ground voters to come together behind a party or a candidate. And we touched on some sort of common ground issues that you didn't seem terribly optimistic could be real issues that would drive an election. Anything else?
Yeah, well, this is why I put my energy behind Rank the Vote. And I probably should have said this earlier on, but everything I say here is my opinion and my opinion only. It does not reflect the opinions of any organization I am affiliated with or will be affiliated with. We'll just get that out of the way.
Sure.
But I would say too, and you can edit this out. Are you picking up the noise in the background or no?
No, I don't hear anything.
Okay, cool. Just want to make sure. So, but this is why I put my energy behind ranked choice voting, because I feel where the middle should be spending their time, and where those who are turned off by the vitriol and the polarization of politics should be really focusing their energy is on creating a system where they can be heard. And right now they can't. First past the post, the system we have now, excludes them from the process. It favors the most partisan voters. It favors it favors the most partisan candidates. It favors the people who can appeal to the partisan base the most. And there are lots of reforms out there. There are lots of ways to reform this. Ranked choice voting is the one that fits the best with existing state and federal law. So it's the easiest one to implement, and it's the one that's going to do the most good. So I would say, if you're in the middle and this is resonating with you, I would strongly recommend checking out Rank the Vote site. I would strongly recommend getting involved, because that's the way. Vote, but forget about having a candidate that reflects your views until you solve that problem. That's number one. Now, I don't want to exclude the partisans out there too. So if you're team blue or team red and you're really happy with your party, the second part of that is that ranked choice voting has also shown to help nominate more electable, effective candidates. And I'll give you an example here. And I'll take two primaries as an example, actually, to make it easier for you. So let's start with Pennsylvania. Standard, plain vanilla, first past the post. There is a Senate race going on there right now that should be a layup for the Republican Party. Granted, the winds have shifted a bit politically with the overturning of Roe v. Wade in the favor of the Democrats, but it's still, with inflation, with Biden's favorability, it should really be an easy win for a Republican. Now, what happened in the primary is you had a three-way race between Mehmet Oz, Kathy Barnett, who is a more, actually, if you give me just a second, I'll get the names up here. Here we go. I just forgot the third guy's name. I just want to get it here. Okay, here we go. I'm going to start over again. So what you had in the Republican primary is you had a three-way race between two relatively moderate candidates. You had Dr. Oz, of course, who everybody knows, and another guy named Dave McCormick. Now, as we started to approach the primary date, another candidate entered into the fold, Kathy Barnett. And Kathy's a former radio show host, highly conservative, has a history of very controversial opinions, including advocating for prejudice against Muslims, for advocating the prohibition of abortion in the case of rape and incest, as well as all other cases. So very much out of the mainstream and out of the mainstream Pennsylvania voter. She turns this three-way race into a bit of a circus. There's a lot of fear that she's going to get elected, and she's ultimately going to be the person who goes to the general. And what ended up happening is Oz won by 1,000 votes. And that wasn't even validated until after a recount. And in that period of time, Barnett is saying she's not going to throw her support behind Oz. That's up to her voters. And so Oz entered into the general election with problems within his own party and had to really work on shoring up his own base before he could even work on the center and maybe Democrats inclined to vote Republican. Now, let's just contrast that with Virginia. Now, due to COVID, the 2020 Virginia gubernatorial primary was held via ranked choice voting. And it was a similar race. So it was a three-way race between two moderate candidates and a more right-wing MAGA candidate whose nickname was Trump in Heels. Now, the first round election results were actually very similar to the Pennsylvania Republican primary. So it was roughly a third, and a third, just about, right? If that were determined by first past the post, we might end up in a very similar situation where where the winning candidate had to go and do some fence mending in their own party in order to get the support of the grassroots. Now, because they tabulate it via ranked choice voting, if you don't win over 50% of the vote, then you take the second choice votes and add them on top of the candidates who remain. So long story short, after tabulation, Glenn Youngkin, a more moderate centrist candidate, ended up winning the primary and ultimately ended up winning the governor's mansion for, I think, the first time in 2 decades. And so I say this to say that it's not just a case where if you're in the center, this is good for you. If you're on either of the wings of our political spectrum, it will help your party nominate more electable candidates. And that should be a win for you.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Again, I'm happy to have shed some more light on ranked choice voting, and happy to have you here doing that today. If obviously, if you're just tuning in or coming in the middle of the show, we're here with Dan Sally. You're listening to Uneven Distribution on the Hearsay Culture Network. Dan, you recently did a show on cryptocurrency, and I thought that would be a fun thing for us to talk about today as well. First of all, since we're sort of having a political process oriented show, I think this might be the first election cycle that we see where cryptocurrency can play a role, first of all, in how people get elected. I see that candidates running for federal office are already allowed to accept cryptocurrency donations, have been for a while. California just passed a law in the last few months allowing its candidates to accept cryptocurrency contributions. 12 states plus Washington, D.C. allow cryptocurrency contributions in some form. So what do you think? Does this move the needle at all?
I don't know. I'm really bullish on the long-term potential of cryptocurrency. I think when you look at especially how it can work for money transfers, it's cheaper and quicker, especially international money transfers. So there's a lot of potential there. I think in terms of it sort of replacing normal currency or being used alongside it, I'm a little more uncertain about that. I think one of the concerns I'd have about especially the political side of things is just the traceability issue. And I haven't dug into the laws. I'm fairly sure that they have something to address that. But cryptocurrencies were designed to be private and in some cases confidential. And I mean, granted, like I think we already have enough of a problem with lack of transparency in our political finance department to open up another door. And I'm not anti-crypto. I just feel like that traceability issue creates, I think, a lot of problems.
Right. But the fact that every transaction is logged might actually make it more transparent in some way, if we could find a way to audit and have access to all that data.
You're right. And so it's just a question of again, like, will lawmakers be able to keep up with the innovations in technology? I don't, with the way the crypto market functions right now, I don't see the advantage. Like, if somebody were to donate $1,000 to me, I'd want to know that tomorrow that's worth $1,000. And with the way some cryptos fluctuate in price, it could be $750, it could be $2,000. It's so unreliable right now. I just rather have the money. I just rather have the fiat currency, as we say.
Right. And you hit on an issue that, I keep looking for issues that might bring voters together, apart from the very charged identity politics kinds of issues. And I know that having a stable currency with a reliable value is probably a thing that most people would agree is a good thing. So I wonder if adoption of cryptocurrency and regulation of it and integrating it rationally into the economy might be an issue that could bring voters together. It's a bit obscure, and probably very few people are actually using cryptocurrency or care that much about it for it to be electorally significant. But I just wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah. So if you let me take you down a bit of a rabbit hole.
Of course.
All right. I'll tell you what I've been exploring now is that if you look at the state of the global economy post World War II, the US dollar has always been at the center of that. And so US monetary policy has a huge impact on world affairs. And a lot of people don't understand exactly how great that is. So a recent example is when the Fed started hiking the interest rate in response to inflation, you started to see a lot of money flow from the developing world into US dollars because people are going to be able to get a better rate of return with a safer asset. Now, it's no coincidence that shortly after that happened, you saw political unrest happen in Sri Lanka because their cost of borrowing went up. Investors started to move their assets out of economies like Sri Lanka into US dollar denominated assets. And that there are cases where that happens again and again. Another great example, if you go back to 2010 or around 2008 to 2010, there was a huge flow of dollars into commodities markets, caused a spike in food prices that a lot of us didn't notice. But it also was the catalyst for the Arab Spring. So it was the reason the Tunisian government was overthrown, the Libyan government was overthrown, civil war in Syria. There's actually a great paper by an organization called the New England Complex Systems Institute that outlines it all. And so that's a very long-winded way of saying that dollar dominance in global financial markets has a lot of drawbacks. And the second part to that is that when you have a polarized Congress that's in charge of the purse strings, that creates an element of instability in global financial markets. I mean, the only time the US credit rating has ever been downgraded was when Congress couldn't reach an agreement on raising the debt ceiling. So effectively, markets are saying, the only thing we're going to ding you for is if you choose not to borrow more. People want the US to borrow more. That's what the markets want them to do. But I think the big question is when so much depends on the dollar maintaining its value, and when the dollar's value could be jeopardized by a small group of senators deciding to filibuster a spending bill. I mean, that's a, I think in systems, you look for single points of failure. That's a pretty big single point of failure. And so really what I would say, one of the big potentials I see long-term for cryptocurrency is to really democratize our monetary system so it's not so beholden to one particular government or one particular country. And that comes with its drawbacks for the United States. It gives us less power in global affairs. We can't, for example, implement sanctions as quickly and as readily as we could. But there's also pluses to it. I think one of the things a lot of people don't realize is the strength of the US dollar and the dominance of the US dollar has really hurt us from an exports perspective, and it's hurt manufacturing. And if our currency were more competitive with others, that might be a different story. And so I do think, again, that's super hypothetical. Most people knowledgeable in it say that the dollar will be the dominant currency for the long term, at least for the foreseeable future. But I do definitely see a lot of potential for cryptocurrency to help there. I think for better or for worse, typically what it takes for something like that to happen is a crisis, which I hope doesn't happen.
Yeah, you and me both.
Yeah.
All right. Speaking of crises, there certainly has been a crisis in our country about faith in elections, leading to riots in the Capitol. And in the aftermath of that, a good chunk of voters who still do not believe that our election systems work as they should. As someone who's been involved in technology for years and years, I've watched, as hackers repeatedly sport with voting machines and show their vulnerabilities over and over again, just when we thought we might have some kind of streamlined, secure, technologically sophisticated, and convenient way to vote. We're a long way from that. Or at least I'm wondering if you feel like we're any closer to that than we've seen in prior elections.
You mean closer to us having a more secure technological base, or closer to the opposite, people just completely losing faith?
I think that the faith would follow the tech, right? If it actually existed and could demonstrably show we are, these voting machines. Of course, there are so many different ways that we vote in the United States, depending on what region and county you live in. Ideally, wouldn't it be great if we could all have the convenience of voting not from a centralized place, but from some device in our home or in our pocket, and be able to do it, in a way that we felt good about it. And I think we're still a long way away from that. But I'm wondering, with your close eye on politics, if you've seen any movement or if you have any faith that we might be closer to such a goal.
I mean, I haven't seen a ton of movement. I think there's a lot of talk and a lot of potential for blockchain, the technology cryptocurrency is based on, to help with that. Because to your point, there's a ledger. Yeah. It's unique. It's hard to hack, or near impossible to hack. And so that would offer a lot of potential for individual voting. I think it's tough to say any one technology would solve the problem, because I think the crisis of faith is really one that's promoted by the candidates. I think Trump certainly did a lot to sow distrust over the electoral process. And, to be even-handed as well, the Democrats have done their part to talk about changes to voting laws as voter suppression, which may or may not be the case. I haven't looked closely enough to know. But what I will say is both sides have certainly done their part to make people feel like the elections are rigged in favor of one party or another, and that's problematic. Oddly enough, I think what kind of saves American electoral integrity right now is the disorganized analog nature of it. Because if you look, elections are administered at the most local level possible. And if you wanted to hack, if you really wanted to have a meaningful impact on an election, there's something like 10,000 different municipalities that are all in charge of their own elections. So that's 10,000 elections, all kind of run in their own way. Some are entirely on paper, some are done on machines, the ballots are, it's near impossible. And so I think that the biggest safeguard in terms of security is just keeping that, how do I put it, that distributed nature of power, really just making sure that the municipalities have the ultimate say. Because ultimately what you get when you do that is you get, like, as one person I said, who is a precinct clerk down in Florida, she said, we're geeks with clipboards. All they want is they want the election to run well. And what a lot of poll workers say is, you've done a good job when you're not on the evening news. And so I think those people do a genuinely good job. And I think that they should be recognized for that. They should be respected for that. And I frankly think that right now, in terms of all available options, that's the best way to ensure that things continue to run fairly.
So keep us analog for the time being.
I am a total Luddite when it comes to elections. Yeah, absolutely.
And work toward a blockchain solution maybe down the road. Okay, I can live with that. Since we're talking about voting tech and processes, I'm interested in knowing how this movement toward ranked choice voting is doing. You said there are some jurisdictions where that is adopted and in place. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what things look like at the national level to make it more broadly the norm?
Well, it's definitely starting to pick up steam. So right now, ranked choice voting for federal elections is the law in some form in Alaska and Maine. Utah operates a number of elections using RCV. Utah, actually, their former Republican chair is a huge RCV proponent. And that's a case, a lot of times what we see in political circles is very often I think maybe the right that's a little more critical of it, but there are a lot of great Republican examples of RCV being used. Alaska, again, is another one. There's a lot of momentum in Nevada right now. Massachusetts, Massachusetts unfortunately lost the ballot initiative back in 2020, but the organization is still active. They're still pushing to get back on the ballot once the waiting period is over. And there are tons of state level organizations. I think Rank the Vote either has organizations or is affiliated with organizations in all 50 states right now. And I think there's a lot of visibility being generated for it because people are feeling left out. People are tired of the polarization, and they're starting to understand that ranked choice voting is the best way to solve that. And so my feeling is that, and again, I'm an optimist, and this may be too aggressive, but my feeling is that by the end of this decade, the majority of elections, if not all the elections, are determined by RCV.
Okay, well, again, we'll double check your time traveler bona fides in a few years, and we'll see how that goes. We're getting down to the end of our time, Dan, sadly. We're going to wrap up with something that is just a little bonus we throw in at the end of the show. We do a facepalm of the week. And I guess, something that's gone terribly wrong that could have gone right had the people in question merely listened to the kinds of visionaries and those with the ability to see the future a little bit more clearly that we try and have on our show. So our facepalm of the week this week has to do, appropriately enough, since we've had a politically themed show, with Donald Trump and the social platform that he launched called Truth Social. Somewhere along the way, in the course of launching this platform, nobody bothered to get the trademark registered, and the trademark application was pending, but they went ahead and launched the network, did all the branding, definitely promoted it. As a digital marketer, I'm interested in getting your take on putting the cart before the horse this way. The trademark application came before the USPTO and was rejected because there are confusingly similar entities in similar enough fields, including Vero, True Social, an app-based social media platform, and the Truth Network, a Christian radio broadcast network. So as a lawyer, I just sort of shake my head and say, no, you don't do your marketing and branding without getting your trademark ducks in a row. As a marketer, what do you think?
So I'm just happy that somebody's finally given Mark Zuckerberg company. Because I don't know if you remember, I don't know how long ago it was where they made this big announcement about changing their name to Meta. And then it turned out there was this obscure IT firm down in Arizona that actually had the name Meta. And then as a really interesting twist, the next day Meta announced they were changing their name to Facebook. But Facebook actually ended up paying, I think it was like $60 million for the name Meta. So I would say, Trump loves to win, doesn't like to come in second place, but I don't think he'll be disappointed with the statement that Truth Social definitely comes in second place when it comes to biggest all-time branding blunders in the social media sphere.
Right. And, as you point out, these other entities that have marks that are close to Truth Social, the name of the Trump platform, might well come after Truth Social and say, hey, no, if they continue using the mark, you're infringing on our mark that we actually do have registered. So something to watch and something to try and avoid the next time you're launching your own social network.
I'll keep that in mind.
Yes. Dan, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show today. I really appreciate your time. Are there any final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with, or any events or upcoming things you'd like to plug?
I am going to sound like a broken record, but there are actually two things I'd like to plug. First off, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but if what I've said resonates and you're really concerned with polarization and you're in that unheard center and you're a partisan and you're interested in getting more electable candidates, I would strongly recommend checking out Rank the Vote. That is a place where we can ensure that the people elected to office truly represent the people who are voting for them. Secondly, if you're interested in diving into the specifics of the issues we argue about, definitely check out my podcast, You Don't Have to Yell. What we do is we dive into a lot of issues deeply, And generally what we find is there's a lot of stuff in those issues that aren't being talked about. And there's a lot more consensus than there is disagreement on these issues. And I think more importantly, there are a lot of things about these issues that, again, aren't being discussed that are super important. And so again, if that's your jam, come check me out.
That's just so wonderful. And I've loved your show for the last 3 years. So I echo that 100%. And I thank all our listeners for being here, partaking of our show and hopefully yours in this podcast format, which I really feel is a great way to go deep into issues that don't get enough attention and discussion in other forms of media. So if you're here and you agree, thanks so much for being here with us and participating in this kind of discourse and dialogue. I think it's a great way for not just people to spend their time but for people to expand their minds and maybe hear perspectives that they might not hear otherwise. And we've certainly been doing that here today with Dan Sally. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Denise. This was an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure as well. And thanks to all of you for joining us here for Uneven Distribution on the Hearsay Culture Network. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
All right.
All right. Thank you. That was great. I think we're finishing just 1 minute over the hour.
Oh, beautiful. No, that's great. I appreciate it. I appreciate you bearing with me as well.
Of course.
Today.
No worries. Nothing to bear with.
Yeah, no, this was fantastic. And I'm happy to, if you ever need me, if you ever need a guest, happy to jump on again. And that's all. I really appreciate the opportunity. I love doing this. It's so relaxing.
Yeah.
Not to have to worry about it, and not to have to worry about the recording aspect. So
yes, it is nice to do other people's shows. And I'm happy to come back on your show sometime too.
I'd love that. I'd actually love that. It's like, and sorry, I shut the window and it's like baking in here right now.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. I think you can see I'm like starting to shine right here, but yeah, no, this was absolutely, I think I have to, it's funny. We've been on with the war in Ukraine. I've been on kind of I've been on a bit of a tear on like foreign policy and such, but I'm starting to get back to more issues I think that are relevant to your expertise. So I'd love to have you back on again.
Yeah, I'd figure that out. Love to do it. Now I have to, for our promotional purposes, just keep you for like 2 minutes longer, do a little promo for the show, and 100%. Then we're out. Yeah. Okay.
100%.
So we'll do that here in 3, 2, 1. Hi, folks. It's Denise Howell. And here on this episode of Uneven Distribution, we're joined by Dan Sally of the You Don't Have to Yell podcast. Dan looks at issues that affect the middle voting bloc of America, the neglected, poor, moderate voters who aren't hanging out on the extremes. Hi, Dan. Great to see you.
Hey, Denise. Likewise.
So today on our show, I'm really excited about the topics we covered. We went pretty deep on the 2024 U.S. presidential elections and what we might expect to see happen there. We talked about whether there are issues that can bring people together. We talked about what role Liz Cheney might play. We talked about rhinos and dinos or dinos and cryptocurrency, voting tech processes, including something I'd never heard of before until I prepped for this show today. Rank the Vote, the advocacy group that you work with, and ranked choice voting. So I think we've given people lots of food for thought and lots of things to anticipate in the upcoming election. Anything you want to add?
No, 100%. I think we went deep. How do I put this? No, 100%. I totally agree. I think we were wide ranging. We went deep, but we didn't go wonky, Denise.
I like it. Wide, but not wonky. There you go.
That's it. So I think if you're on the left, on the right, if you're a rhino or a dino, there's going to be something for you to enjoy in here.
Absolutely. We hope you like the show. All right. Thank you, Dan.
No problem. Thank you again. And once this is out, let me know and I'll put it out on social and get the word out.
Definitely. Will do.
All right, Denise. Well, thank you again. Next time I'm going to be on time.
Oh, don't worry. I know. God, you have no idea the shitstorm my life has been lately. So I totally get it.
Glad we're both in the vortex.
Yes, exactly.
All right.
All right. Take care.
You too, Denise. Bye-bye.
Bye.